I tweeted out this slide cover, and someone's response to it, to why you should build it, is because I said so. And I think I probably could just leave with that, but I will give you a few more concrete examples. All right, let's get started. So, as you heard, my name is Christina, and I'm a front-end developer and an educator. I've been teaching a little bit more these days, but I saw someone on Twitter refer to it as being on the bird, and it gives me a chuckle every time I hear that, so that's what I'm going to call it from now on, so you can find me on the bird at Christina Trung. All right, so let's start with a little brief history lesson. So we have this guy to thank for coming up with the World Wide Web. So he was a scientist at CERN, and he was just looking for ways to share research documents with his colleagues. And long story short, he ended up coming up with the World Wide Web and also created HTML, and eventually created the W3C, which is the governing body for standards and regulations for HTML on the web. So basically, websites pretty much started off as digital versions of pages of text documents. So when we started creating planning, conceptualizing full page websites, we stuck with that page metaphor. So often you would have each page would be individually designed in Photoshop, all the content pieces carefully laid out. But then what exactly does make a page? Why can't we put all of this content on one page? Right? And we can, and that's when one-page websites became popular. Instead of using separate pages, we would just have them in discrete sections. And I don't know if anyone here has freelanced before or worked with clients or had to make a website for someone. This misconception is if I just mush everything onto one page, it'll be cheaper, right? So how much is one page versus three, right? So they thought they would get one over by doing that. Didn't always work, because when you kind of look at this is a very basic example, but doing this in one page or 3 pages really isn't that much different because it's the same amount of content, right? Or let's say you have a 10-page website, but they all basically look the same. Is it harder, or does it take less time than if you were building like a more complicated one page? So that brings us back to the question, what exactly is a page? Throw in responsive web design, and we have different device sizes to think about now. So when I started out back in 2006, there were literally 2 resolutions I had to worry about. 1280 by 1024, 1024 by 768, that's it. We didn't have to worry about phones and tablets and all that stuff, and now we do. So when responsive web design first came out, most of the time what we ended up doing was basically expanding and shifting and stacking content. But as responsive web design techniques have evolved, we have to also think about how people use their devices rather than the physical size of the screens. So I'm not saying that we can't use Photoshop to make designs anymore. And it's really hard to go away from this sort of page metaphor, but focusing on building components rather than individual pages can help us to make a more cohesive overall experience. So here's an example of a project I worked on earlier last year called Women in Tech. So here's an example of 3 pages. So one is our interview page, the blue one, and then there's an About Us page and a How to Contribute page. So they're different yet similar. So there are components that are the same across the pages. There are components that are a little bit different. Each interview is going to be a little bit different. There's different ways we can present images, pull quotes, and whatnot. So when we started this redesign, we did start using Photoshop and creating what an interview would look like, what an about page would look like. But we always kept in mind what the cohesive overall experience was going to be. So when we were building it out, we built it as individual standalone modules instead of page by page. And that way, when we put new interviews together, we can literally just copy and paste the little bits that we need. Kind of like Lego pieces. You take what you need and you put them together and make what you want. So you can mix and match, and each page can be customized for the content needs, but still have an overall cohesive style. So a design system may consist of many parts, and it's going to vary depending on your needs. So there are some considerations you want to keep in mind. When you're planning a design system, the first part is your visual components. That's usually what we think about when we say designs. So like your colors, typography, that sort of thing. You also want to think about your user flow patterns. So how do people actually navigate your site? Are you going to have hover interactions? How are pages redirected? How are people going to actually use your site? And the next three, your brand identity, content strategy, tone, voice, writing style, all of these strategies also play into how you design your pages, because how you design your pages is how you communicate with your user. So for example, for your writing style, if your writing style is very professional, you don't want to use a font like Comic Sans, because Comic Sans is supposed to be playful. So your brand identity, how you want to present your content, informs what kind of designs you make as well. So your design system may contain many different things. Some of these definitions may overlap a little bit. Some people have different opinions. So I'm just going to go over sort of in general overall what they mean. So style tiles this concept was created by Samantha Warren, and they're basically just a collection of interface elements like fonts and colors to help convey the overall design language, the look and feel. So as you can see in the quote, what she meant when she created this concept was for when a mood board is too general, but a full-on comp is too literal. So the idea is, think of it as an interior designer. You would probably pick out paint chips and color swatches before they go and build out complete pages. So that's really the purpose of style tiles. And the advantage of doing this is that you can get the clients to agree on just the color scheme, overall look and feel before you put the time and energy into building full out designs. Libraries and frameworks. So some of the definitions for these may vary a little bit, but basically they're a collection of standardized patterns. So you would put this together after your designs have been finalized, everything's agreed on. This is sort of that one reference of what the final designs are going to look like. And they also document how to use them, what they're used for. They have the code snippets, they have examples. So this is the place where you have all your production ready, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and anytime you make a change to the design system, you want to make sure you update this and keep everything cohesive. So some advantages of having a framework or a library is everything is literally documented. So this example is from MailChimp's pattern library. So you can see that they have pretty much everything that you need to make a page, whether it's their grid system, what typography to use, error messages. And so the advantage for this is designers and developers have to work together now. So you can't have one person go rogue and just throw in an extra button, because you'll be able to see if there's one thing that's a little bit different. So every decision you make now affects the entire team, affects the entire design system. So it fosters better communication among developers and designers. And it also helps developers that don't specialize in front end. So if a back-end developer needs something to be done, they may not necessarily need a front-end developer to create a page for them. They can just literally copy and paste what they need, put it together, and then put in their own stuff afterwards. So they're basically a toolkit. Everything is pre-assembled and tested. So style guides is basically the documentation. So the previous example, some people may call that a style guide as well. But you can actually have style guides for pretty much anything. So it doesn't have to be just for the design and the code. Here's a style guide for writing, voice and tone. Here is Twitter's style guide for how to use their logo. And you can even have a style guide just to how to literally write the code. This is where you have to settle those debates, tabs, spaces, lowercase, uppercase, all that stuff. So most of the stuff I'm going to be talking about for the rest of the talk is about CSS, but you can really apply these principles to pretty much any programming language. But basically, a design system should include everything that makes up your product. So it's going to be maybe a little bit different per project. So when you're creating a design system, you want to take the inventory of the design. So here's an example from Mina Markham's talk about working on Hillary Clinton's campaign website. So she literally physically took inventory and cut out the pieces, but basically the idea is to find all the little different pieces of your design and find the things that match, that should be grouped together, and if there are any inconsistencies, fix them. So do you really need 3 shades of gray that are almost the same? So you can find those types of inconsistencies and fix them. And then next you want to define and establish rules. So this could be any kind of rules, whatever you think your team may need, talk about them, agree on something, and move on to the next step. So I have less than 5 minutes left, so I might be going through this a little bit quick, but don't worry, I'll be sharing the slides. So the next thing is to create a library or a framework. So you want to make sure you add all those pieces that we were looking at in some of the earlier examples, like your color palette, your typography, icons, anything that your system needs. And don't forget to document it. If you don't document it, all it is just a collection of pretty designs. So the documentation actually tells you how to use it, why you made those decisions, and provides any additional information like code snippets. So when you're ready to write the CSS, don't just write it, create an entire architecture. So some goals you want to keep in mind is make it easy to understand. So using class names that describe what it does makes it easier for someone who's just starting the project to come in and understand. So if I call something red box, and let's say we decide to change the error message to orange, red box for an orange error message doesn't really make sense anymore, right? But it's still an error message. So think about that. Make it scalable and flexible. So in the first example, this class will only work if it's in a div. What if you change your div to a section? It doesn't work anymore. So think about those things when you're writing your CSS. And make it reusable. So the first example, you can only use this button if it's in a section element. The bottom one, you could use it anywhere. So only be as specific as you need. And think about how you organize your code. So again, this can apply to pretty much any programming language. So group stuff in related chunks and in a way that is easy to read. So here are some popular methodologies. Me personally, I like to use these as guidelines, and I take what I like from each and then create my own. So when you're learning or when you're starting out with a project, the first step is just get it to work, right? But once you get it to work, make it work better. Because when you're building a design system, this is a long-term investment. So unfortunately, there are some challenges. Time and budget. You do have to invest a little more time in the beginning to plan this. You also have to invest time to maintain it. So most of the time when I talk to designers and developers, they're like, yeah, I want to go with this. But the people who have the money to pay for the time and the budget may need a little convincing as to why you need this. So it's a long-term investment. You may have to hire someone who specializes in this. But luckily, there are tons of advantages. So shared vocabulary, everybody speaks the same language, everybody knows what's going on. You have one source for your final design and development. Your teams can share it. Improves teamwork across disciplines. The documentation will help you onboard new people a lot quicker. You can just give them the documentation and they should be able to get started pretty quickly. Everything's tested and standardized and consistent. And here are some more resources because 15 minutes is just not long enough to talk about this. And there is the link to the slides. And I literally just bought this domain about 2 hours ago. So it's nice and short. You can remember it. If you want to know more or see some of the sources that I linked to, go ahead and visit that. All right. Thank you.